Globalized World by Liu Cheng and Egon Spiegel. I hope you can hear me and you can see the screen.
Yes, clearly.
Yes, George, we can hear you and we can see the screen.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. And the title is When Your Soul Cannot Cope with What You Have Experienced. If you have taken part in war and obeyed its special laws, you will have seen things people don't usually see. For one thing, the laws of war are completely other than the laws of normal life. Perhaps you killed, hurt, and harmed people. Perhaps you tortured people, something that you would never do in your normal life. Back home, you may cradle your small child in the heart of your home, get laid with your wife, celebrate birthdays, and attend parties. You will not and cannot talk about the pictures in your mind, and they will not vanish. Nobody can reach you except maybe other veterans, but not your friends who have never been in war. In short, you are traumatized, or as doctors call it, you have post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. In this situation, you need all your energy, all your vitality for coming to terms with all the horrors you have experienced. You are sexually blocked by your experiences. They rob your vitality, and you fail in partnerships, friendship, and family. You fail at work. You contemplate suicide. And finally, you commit suicide. In USA, nearly 60,000 former Vietnam soldiers did this. This is more than were killed by others in the Vietnam War. By the way, following the Falklands War in 1982, in which 255 British soldiers were killed, 300 veterans killed themselves after their return. Young people under 20 to 24 years old who fought in war are 4 times more likely to commit suicide than the same age group who didn't serve in the army. In the USA right now, there are 25 million former army personnel. 1.6 million of them fought in Afghanistan and Iraq. We have to be aware that young people are too sensitive to make war. Thank you very much indeed for listening. And welcome to Global Peace Studies. And today's theme is renewable energy, the nexus with climate change and security in Eastern Africa. And our speakers today are Dr. Susan Mwangi and Dr. Joseph Njoroge. Dr. Susan Mwangi is a lecturer in political history and international relations at Kenyatta University in Nairobi, Kenya. She specializes in security and governance research and analysis. In fact, she's not really new to global peace because she's part of us. She has already contributed a paper, which was excellent, and we are looking forward to another one today. And Dr. Joseph Njoroge is an accomplished professional with over 30 years of experience in leadership, management, and engineering. He has served in various capacities, including being permanent secretary in the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum in Kenya. It's a pleasure having both of you. Thank you so much for joining us. And I welcome everybody also on board to join us in today's discussion on this very topical issue, really burning issue. And I hope, Susan, you are able to begin, or is it Joseph would like to start?
George.
Yes.
And good afternoon, good morning, everybody, depending on where you're listening us from. I hope you can see me. George, you can see me?
Yes, I can see you now. Thank you.
Thank you. I am trying to share, but I'm not able to share. It was working, but it's no longer working. So I'm hoping that you're going to share the presentation. You're going to help in moving the slides because I am trying to share and I am not able to share. George, you have a different one that
really?
I sent you. Yes, I sent you one this afternoon.
Okay, I have the old one, the one you sent to me earlier.
Yes.
So
as you look for it and as you share,
right.
As you have heard, my name is Susan. I teach at Kenyatta University. I am not new to the peace and security and justice studies. We have been discussing and debating with the Catholic Peace Network in Entebbe online on how we can drive the agenda for peace and justice and how we can have courses in the university on the same. And I am happy to report that now Kenyatta University has a very vibrant School of Peace and Security, where we have several professors who are teaching in the fields of peace, security, justice, governance in different themes and areas. So our presentation today was actually based on a presentation that we did that was based on the Africa Climate Summit that has just ended in Nairobi. And our presentation was looking at security and how renewable energy can actually contribute to security and peace in the East African region. We have expanded it to the African continent because we have recognized that the African continent is a continent that is endowed with numerous resources that can be used to drive the renewable energy debate and discourse. So in September this year, on the 4th, the African leaders met in Nairobi and made a declaration after recognizing that the climate crisis does not respect any boundary. The droughts, the receding waters, the communities that are getting affected by droughts are majorly found in the African continent, despite the fact that the African continent has innumerable resources that can be harnessed to produce a green energy for the globe. So out of that, the African Leaders Summit came up with several recommendations and pronouncements. They pronounced themselves that they recognize the potential for the African continent to be at the forefront on the climate change debate because it can provide the solutions. Instead of becoming a victim or engaging in the debate of the African continent is a victim of the climate change, how can the African continent actually provide a solution to the climate crisis that is affecting the globe today? The levels of global warming are so high such that none of us is not affected by the extreme heat, sometimes extreme colds, animals dying. In the African continent, we have seen very many people living below $1 a day because of increased drought, increased famines. Pastoralists are going without water, agriculturalists are going without food. And because of this food insecurity and competition for scarce resources, then it has become a continent where endemic and protracted conflict continue to engage, to emerge and persist. And so you will find that in the African continent, about half of the countries, despite having a lot of resources, these countries, the people in these countries are living below $1 a day. And the communities are so fragile, they only need to be triggered a bit and they will engage in any sort of insecurity and conflict over the scarce resources. So out of that, we decided to look at what is or what can the renewable energy debate contribute to resolving the conflict on climate change. And we concentrated on renewable energy because the fossil fuels are the biggest challenge that we have globally in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions. So the debate in the African summit picked 3 major issues that I want us to be looking at this afternoon. There was the debate on decarbonization. There was also the debate on financing and investment, and the African leaders were very strong in their argument on the need for investment at 3 levels. One is on adaptation and mitigation of especially the vulnerable groups. Number 2 was on asset financing of the African continent. And number 3 is that because the African continent, majority of the African countries are debt-ridden, how can the debts be either cancelled or a discussion done so that the African continent is able to concentrate its energies on renewable energy? And the third debate, of course, was on the fossil fuel. And we picked the idea of the alternative energy, which is renewable energy. And we appreciate that the African continent has enormous of these resources in terms of geothermal, hydro, solar, and wind. And this can be found all over the African continent, in Gabon, in Niger, in Kenya, in Rwanda, in Congo DRC, in Ethiopia, and in Kenya. So I am not going to engage you so much on the debate on renewable energy because engineer has been at the forefront in discussing the use of renewable energy to resolve or at least to mitigate the climate crisis. And so without further ado, I want to invite Engineer Joseph Njoroge to take us through the debate on renewable energy. It's a debate that we will continue engaging in. So we welcome you to give us your comments on the same. And welcome this afternoon, Engineer. I hope you can hear me, George.
Yes, I can hear you.
So I usher in Engineer to do the presentation.
Wonderful. Welcome, Dr. Njoroge, if you hear us.
Can you hear me, George?
Yes, yes, I can.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you.
And good afternoon, everybody in the forum.
Good afternoon.
I'm sure they have responded. Now,
That's right.
Susan has made an introduction of the nexus between renewable energy, climate change, and security. And as you know, security and peace have a lot of synergy, which I will explain as we go on. How many minutes do I have in the presentation, George?
You have 30 minutes, please.
20 minutes, eh?
30.
30 minutes.
Right.
So I think I will be able to cover the subject fairly comprehensively. So
Right.
renewable energy is one of the major mitigators of climate change. And this is so because, as we all know, one of the main contributions to climate change is the fossil fuels. And as you'll reckon in the introduction, I have talked about fossil fuels. That is slide number 1. I have talked about the details of how much fossil fuels contribute. That is about 92% of the total energy production. But also I have said that energy is so crucial as a socio-economic development driver. And therefore it is a product that you cannot really do without. It is therefore important that even as we devise ways and means of reducing climate change impact on the globe, we must address these fossil fuels, oil and gas, which mainly contribute to these emissions in the sector of energy. And therefore, you must look for a substitute product that will be able to give us that very important product of socio-economic development, that is energy, and which will also be able to serve as a source and replace the fossil fuels, oil and gas. This is quite an uphill task, members. Moving from about 8% to a big component, even if we say we would want to get to even about half of its contribution to the total portfolio of energy sources, it means we will need to do a lot in order to exploit this very important resource. However, what is very pertinent in the African continent is that renewable energy sources are very significant. And when we talk about renewable energy sources, we are talking about wind, we are talking about solar, we are talking about hydro. Those are very common renowned. We are also talking about geothermal, one of the new sources of energy which exists deep inside the ground, and it's found in some areas of the African continent, especially what we normally refer to as the Rift Valley. And there is a very new product which is called the kinetic power plant, and this one uses air and water. Basically, it's like a hydro plant, except that instead of leaving out the water to flow downstream after producing electricity, you feed back that same water to continue producing electricity. And this is quite an effective and efficient source of the renewable energy. It's very new, and maybe we will be doing more in terms of presentations ahead to explain how it does that. So these renewables, which we normally describe as continuous and unlimited supply of energy, and with very minimal greenhouse gas emissions, are technologies which can almost be utilized without extincting them. Of course, we know fossil fuels, oil, gas, has got a time limit. At one time or another, we will have exploited all those resources, and we will have to be looking for other sources. But with renewable energy, the word renewable in itself is an indication that it is usable time and again. When wind blows a turbine, it continues to blow that turbine and it doesn't extinct. It is very different from maybe a fuel, which once you burn in the engine, you have burned it. Slide 3, please, George. You are still on slide 2. Can you hear me, George?
Yes, I can hear you. Somehow
I am just if you could move to slide 3, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, this climate change, and I don't want to go into the details of defining climate change. We all know that climate change has had a very big debate globally, and it is linked to consequences that reach the very heart of even the security agenda. And the reason why it does so is when we talk about climate change, we're also talking about things like displacement of people, especially when floods occur. We're also talking about people scrabbling for very limited resources because of drought. And we're also talking about crop failure, which of course leads to intensified competition for food, water, and energy. It is therefore evident that use of renewable energy leads to reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and therefore impacts positively to countering the phenomenon of climate change. And this countering of the climate change phenomenon, next slide, George. Seems it's very slow.
Right.
I can still continue using my.
Okay. It's ready.
Yes. I've just talked about the issue of
climate change, slide 4.
Which has been linked to consequences that reach the very heart of the security. Now I'm on slide 5. And in the slide 5, I'm explaining that when we counter climate change, we are talking about countering the displacement of people due to flooding. We are also countering the effect of drought and famine that results from crop failures. And therefore, we are indeed talking about countering insecurity. And you can see the connection between security and climate change. And the connection, therefore, between renewable energy resources and the climate change phenomenon, and the link between the countering of climate change and the mitigation of security and risks are clearly evident from those slides that we have just covered. And it is important to recognize that exploitation of renewable energy resources may attract some security concerns. There are times when we install equipment which exploits renewable energy like wind turbines, they can also in some areas be disruptive. But even though that happens, the merits far outweigh the demerits. Because when we are able to displace the oil, the fuels that produce a lot of emissions with wind energy, the impact of reducing emissions is very significant. And those concerns that have been raised about climate change and which we must address even by making sure that we replace the current conventional sources of energy, like fuel, with renewable energy, is a very important subject. And I think when we are talking about even the African summit, that is one area that will be very critical, because as we proceed, we will appreciate that Africa is endowed with a lot of resources of renewable energy. And therefore, we are advantaged in making use of this very critical resource. And once we make use of this resource, we will be able to counter climate change. I want to also go into the energy itself, just for people to appreciate this broad subject of energy. And then we will go to the renewable energy itself. And then after that, we will see how renewable energy can mitigate insecurity and therefore bring about security and peace, of course. I will not want to go through a lot of details, but in this slide, I'm just trying to bring into perspective what is energy. And energy is basically defined as the ability to do work by scientists. And it has enabled a lot of modern civilization. And one of the reasons why we have been able to make use of energy to civilize the world is because we are able to change from one form of energy to another. That conversion, transition of energy from one form to another. Like, for example, we are able to change the wind energy from what it does to the environment to turn a turbine and which produces electricity. And electricity itself is a very versatile form of energy, which can then be converted to many other uses of energy. It can be converted to light energy, it can be converted to sound energy, it can be converted to heat energy. It's very versatile. And without universal access to energy services of adequate quality, quantity, reliability, and affordability, countries will not be able to sustain dynamic growth, build more inclusive societies, and accelerate progress towards eradicating poverty. In essence, we are saying energy is an enabler. We need it for the global development, and expanded energy provision is also associated with rising incomes, increased life expectancy, and enhanced social well-being. We all know the impact. We are on the next slide, George. I know your technology is very slow, but we are now on the next so that we can save on time. I can continue using the hard copy, but please just try to display for the benefit of the members. Subsequently, there is a cross correlation between the level and the intensity of per capita energy consumption and a country's economic growth. That is the GDP. We normally define energy as a very critical enabler of socioeconomic development. And when we talk about per capita consumption of energy, it has been established by economists that there is a correlation between the country's per capita consumption of energy and the GDP. Indeed, those countries which have very high GDPs have very high per capita consumption of energy. And therefore, for global development, we will need to make sure that all citizens access energy in a reliable, in an affordable, and also in an accessible form. And that way, the countries will be able to develop, grow, and be able to raise in terms of their GDP. Countries in sub-Saharan Africa, which have very low capital energy consumption of commercial energy, obviously also tend to have correspondingly low per capita gross domestic product. And therefore, in Africa, a marked decline in the consumption of commercial energy over the last 3 decades can be attributed to a weak and deteriorating economic performance and slowed industrialization. And therefore, we need to ensure that we address this very critical matter of access to energy by Africans so that we can be able to say we are developing Africa. We are endowed indeed with the vast resources of energy. And I want to now move to the slide where I am going to talk about renewable energy. The rest of the information is very simple. It is articulating the spread of energy resources in the African continent. And in a nutshell, we are saying Africa has a unlimited potential of, for example, solar energy. We have more than 10 terawatt hours. We have abundant hydro energy, about 350 gigawatt hours, and wind, about 110 gigawatt hours. Then we have a lot of geothermal energy resources. This very many and huge potential of energy resources in Africa need to be utilized. There have been notable initiatives, that is on slide 615. And I do not want to go through the details, but we can see there have been efforts from USAID, there have been efforts from Africa Development Bank, from World Bank, from European Union, from other bilateral and regional initiatives like AFD, JICA, and EIB. All these global bodies have been very active in terms of supporting the exploitation of the energy resources in Africa. However, the rate at which that exploitation is happening does not adequately amount to a critical path and a critical speed at which we need to move so that we can be able to mitigate climate change. Let me now go to renewable energy. This is on slide 17, George. And by definition, these renewables provide a continuous and unlimited supply of energy with very minimal greenhouse gas emissions. However, there are technical constraints, and because of the intermittent nature of these sources of energy, particularly wind and solar, they are quite intermittent. They are not available throughout. Nearly 98% of electricity in the world today is generated by conventional technologies. That is fossil fuels, nuclear, and large hydro. While the total share of modern renewables, which is often referred to as new renewables, is only about 2%. And this is the area where we have a lot of potential in Africa. And we need to address the exploitation of these renewable energy sources. These renewable energy sources are closely associated with the concept of sustainable development, which is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. What we are saying is that if we exploit this renewable energy, we do not utilize them to their full potential because they are renewable. We exploit and they keep renewing themselves. As I said, the challenges which pertain to this access of renewable energy technologies is their availability, their acceptability. There are several areas where these renewables have not yet been accepted, mainly because I would say Some of them have got challenges, like I said, intermittency, which means it is very difficult to utilize them for industrialization. But technology has been, research in these renewables has been very aggressive. And we have seen a lot of mitigation measures to make sure that they are reliable and they can be utilized almost throughout. To ensure development, according to these principles, renewable energy is expected to provide an increasingly important contribution to supply, diversification, emissions reduction, and energy sustainability over the long term. I want to go and just sweep through very briefly about the renewable energy, the various forms of renewable energy. And biomass is one of the renewable energy sources. And the reason why we classify biomass as a renewable energy is, as you know, in Africa, most of the countries use firewood as a form of energy. And the beauty about the use of this firewood is they utilize the firewood, but they also plant the trees. And that is how the aspect of renewability comes in. And therefore, timber processing, residues, solid municipal waste, and sewage, aquatic flora are all forms of biomass. And without laboring too much, I want to go to solar energy, which we all know. This solar energy is radiated from the sun. It reaches the earth over a wide range of the wave spectrum. Indeed, almost all countries in the world have access to this solar energy in one way or another. In Africa, we are fairly privileged to have quite a lot of solar energy. And because of its tropical, the fact that the equator line passes through, almost cutting Africa into halves, we have most of the countries with a very high level of radiation. And therefore, solar energy is quite adequate in the African continent. Then we have got wind energy. Wind energy is very prevalent in most areas of Africa. Is harnessed by using wind turbines. And these turbines can be used to lift water, grind mills, or even generate electricity. And quite a lot of countries in the African continent have used wind energy for lifting water. However, with the rising cost of oil, the exploitation of the wind energy is becoming increasingly more attractive, particularly in areas remote from the grid, and oil supply is quite a challenge in terms of logistics. So we have seen many off-grid areas which have been served with wind energy as a way of lifting water from boreholes and raising that water up to overhead tanks, and then being able to utilize gravity to use that energy effectively and efficiently. The other source of renewable energy is small hydropower plants. These ones are basically those sites with less than 30 megawatts potential. And these are usually uneconomical to exploit. But fortunately, the African continent is also endowed with a lot of huge sources of hydro energy. And I will cover that in a short while. Geothermal, this is energy released from the earth in form of high temperature and high pressure steam. So basically you drill the ground about 6 kilometers downstream, although that distance differs from one place to another. You heat that steam, which is able to be tapped at a very high temperature and very high pressure and it is therefore able to utilize it to drive a turbine and generate electricity. Currently, we only about, for example, in our country, Kenya, the potential of geothermal energy is about 10,000 megawatts, and we have been able to exploit about just about 10%, about 805 megawatts. So we still have a lot. This other power plant, which I talked about, the kinetic power plant, is another form of renewable energy. And I do know that 500 kilowatt and 100 kilowatt pilot have already successfully been launched in Thailand. And this uses very simple technology of putting water enclosed in a steel tube and then creating a circular movement of floaters within a mass of water. And that circular movement creates a continuous rotation of a rotor, which then is able to be utilized with a magnetic field press, which therefore generates energy. Basically using the water and air. And the reason why I say water and air is for the water to be able to get to the top once it reaches the bottom. It is only possible to use what we call buoyancy in science. And that buoyancy lifts up the tubes and goes up and then comes down again. And finally, you end up with a continuous rotation. And that continuous rotation gives you power with the use of a magnetic field. The resources of renewable energy in the African continent, as I said, are quite substantial. And for example, in DRC, we have River Inga. And the potential of River Inga, the hydro potential is almost able to power the entire Africa if well exploited. Kenya has an exploited potential, as I had said, of almost 10,000 megawatts of geothermal energy. Uganda and Ethiopia have huge hydro potential, and all the countries have immense unexploited potential of both wind and solar energy. As an example, the energy mix of Kenya is shown at the appendix. There's an appendix here which is showing the energy mix. And without even going there, I can tell you that over 92% of energy dispatch in Kenya is renewable energy, mainly comprising of geothermal, hydro, a bit of wind, and a bit of solar. That is one example, just as a typical example of exploitation of renewable energy in one country in Africa, which obviously has reduced the emissions, because the thermal power plants contributes just an average of 8%. Otherwise, the rest of energy of the grid energy is green and renewable green energy. If we now look at, having looked at the renewable energy, it is important, as is the theme of this forum, to look at how is this renewable energy contributing to security. Because as I said, climate change, which is what is being, climate change is benefiting a lot from utilization of green energy. And once we mitigate climate change, we are helping preemption of movement of people. And when we are talking about displacement or movement of people, that in itself is indeed an insecurity. The idea that a warming planet threatens stability around the globe is not a new one. The impacts of warming on conflicts between nations and among ethnic groups within nations are just few manifestations of the instability. This is where we are covering the area of climate change and security. The warming planet causes changes to national environment, posing numerous threats to humanity, increased competition of resources like fertile land and fresh water, and also climate hazards such as extreme weather, higher temperatures, droughts, floods, wildfires, storms, sea level rise, soil degradation, and acidifying oceans are intensifying threats to infrastructure, health, water, and food security. Security and peace are enablers of socioeconomic and political development. And therefore, over and above security for better lifestyle, security is also a critical catalyst for socioeconomic development. The IAE defines energy security as the uninterrupted availability of energy sources at an affordable price. Climate change directly affects hydropower energy, for example, production, leading to use of alternative sources, which could be thermal. And once these alternative sources are utilized, again, we start increasing the emissions. Indeed, heat waves and droughts are already putting existing energy production under stress, making it even more important to reduce fossil fuel emissions. Now, having covered the issues of renewable energy, climate change, a demonstration of how climate change impacts on security, mostly positive impact, it is now action time for the African continent. And action time because we recognize that climate change is a global challenge, which requires concerted efforts by all countries, regions, and the entire world. We also recognize that climate change impacts adversely to national security of both the lifestyle of the people and also the specific security of energy. We recognize that global energy production relies mainly on coal, oil, and gas, which contributes about to 90% of the total emissions, and that all countries share the same planet, making it an urgent need to reduce dependency on coal, oil, and gas, and replace with the net zero or less emission alternatives so as to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Cognizance that renewable energy has minimal emissions and is a feasible alternative to the coal, oil, and gas, and appreciating that Africa is endowed with various forms of unexploited renewable energy resources, and that most of the countries in Africa are in the early stages of industrialization and growth, cognizance of the fact that energy and other infrastructure developments contribute to enhanced security due to resultant effective and efficient response times, and even a well-lit environment. We all know that insecurity is significantly reduced by provision of light. Just by providing light in urban areas, particularly in our countries of the African continent, makes a very big contribution to reduction of insecurity and therefore enhancement of peace. There is urgent need to enhance exploitation of the renewable energy technologies in the development of energy infrastructure in the countries of the African continent. And due to the high upfront capital costs attributable to the renewable energy development, the relevant stakeholders of the African region need to mobilize resources both internally and externally to expedite exploitation of the potential resources in line with their projected energy demands. I would want to point out here that when we talk about carbon credit, we talk about this climate change being a global phenomenon, which needs global energy focused on the mitigation measures. It is important to say that the African continent needs to ask for a bigger pie of the resources available so that we can be able to exploit these renewable energy resources and therefore reduce insecurity, that is, enhance peace, and also reduce greenhouse gas emissions globally. We all know that we have one planet, and therefore, when we reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Africa, it contributes to the entire world. The African countries therefore need to put in place favorable policies and fiscal regimes that will facilitate the renewable energy production developments. There is also need to put in place innovative methods of large power plants development by several countries, pooling resources and effecting interconnection with the extra high voltage transmission lines so as to benefit from the economics of scale and therefore minimize the tariffs. There already exists such interconnection amongst many countries in Africa. The abundance of renewable energy potential in Africa as a whole is an opportunity for the global focus to the exploitation of these renewables to achieve global benefit of reduced greenhouse gas emissions and mitigate climate change phenomenon worldwide. There being a global benefit, pooled resources of climate change mitigation need to be handsomely appropriated to Africa continent for the benefit of all mankind. Because when we reduce these greenhouse gas emissions, we are benefiting the entire globe. And therefore, we need to benefit more from the pooled resources so that we can be able to confer that global benefit to all the countries in the world. I think that is the end of my presentation. I would want to leave out the rest of the time so that we can be able to cover as many questions as members will raise. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to me.
Thank you very much indeed, Joseph, for this wonderful presentation. Thank you also, Susan. Now it's time for questions and comments. Please feel free to raise your hand for any question that you might have. And yes.
George.
Yes, Susan.
Maybe at this part of the conclusion,
right,
is the challenge that the African continent faces in terms of governance and what role the church would play in ensuring that the debate on the use of renewable energy is appropriated by all understanding. That is not a question, but food for thought for all of us because we are engaged in the Catholic, majority of us are in the Catholic Peace Network that is discussing peace building. How can we ensure that the debate on renewable energy, that governments commit and honor their commitments in what they say they are going to offer to the common citizen in Africa?
Excellent. Thank you for the food for thought.
George, maybe I can even override what Susan has said. you remember my conclusion was that we need to have more resources appropriated. Appropriation is one thing. Absorption of those resources is another. And that is exactly what Susan has raised. Very important point. Because from where I start, I do know that the utilization of resources itself is also a challenge, because sometimes due to slow project management development and governance issues, as she has raised.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Let's turn to Thomas. Thomas, you're welcome.
Hello, I hope you can hear me okay. My camera's not working. So thank you for that presentation, both colleagues. This question has, puzzled me for many years. I suppose I'm a philosopher of ecology and peace for many years. The question of renewable resources, obviously rational. If human beings were totally rational, we would work this out, sort it. It would have been sorted by now. I'm as a philosopher, I'm concerned we don't have the reason as a capacity to actually sort this because of our irrationality. So as peace scholars, we have to think through what we can do to, the thing that's missing from this talk is the human resources, our intelligence, our collective will to solve these problems. I mean, it seems like we much prefer going around fighting each other, witness Ukraine, Yemen, etc. So that my question is, what can we do philosophically? I think we need to come up with a new metaphysics that is about sustainability, a spiral shape to time instead of the linear Big Bang catastrophic end theology that we have. I think theologians have a duty, and since a lot of you are Catholic thinkers, to come up with a rival to the traditional Genesis apocalypse narrative, because that sort of feeds into, oh, there's nothing we can do, only God can save us. I've met Christians that say that. It's hopeless. Why bother with peace? God wants war. He's going to destroy the planet. What you're doing is blasphemous. As long as people think like that, we won't have the intellectual resources to solve these problems. So that's my philosophical point. The second point, technical thing. Our speakers didn't mention hydrogen. And I think this is a lacuna. I think hydrogen energy can play a huge role in renewable energy. And there's a new discovery being made of something called white hydrogen, which is now being found by prospectors around the world. Huge resources of natural hydrogen that can be tapped and provide a huge degree of renewable energy. So, my point's twofold. One a metaphysical thing, the other a technical thing about hydrogen. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, Thomas. And I hope that Susan and Joseph can respond to that, a philosophical question and the technical aspect of it. You can respond immediately if you wish, Joseph and Susan.
Well, don't worry, move on to another question. It's sort of a comment, really. Susan, go.
George.
Yes, I hear you, Susan.
Yes, you can hear me. That for me is a comment. Nature does not need us, but we need nature. Unfortunately, every day we are engaged in acts of depleting the very resources that we have. And God gave us nature. God has given us resources, but we are not able to manage the resources. And therefore, he seems to be annoyed. So for me, it is more of a comment, a philosophical, metaphysical comment, than it is a question for discussion. And therefore, I want to pick it as a comment. the environment in which we live in, that we have been given by God, is an environment that we all need to work very hard to manage and to protect. But are we able to do that when we have a lot of issues, especially on governance, politicization of the very resources, the politics of the global north and the global south, where the global north is siphoning a lot of resources that the African continent needs in the process of harnessing the resources that they have for the African continent. So thank you for the comment.
I think I can respond to the one of hydrogen. Yes, indeed. Just like I talked about a new technology of the kinetic power plant, hydrogen is another very versatile form of renewable energy, mainly because of its ease of transportation, and it is gaining currency. But I concentrated more on technologies which are already in very advanced use. That is hydro, geothermal, solar, wind. And then it is also very important for us to support and to give space for the use of these other new technologies like the green energy, which has been mentioned, hydrogen, and also the kinetic power plant. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Richard, and then we go to Hubert. Richard, please.
Good afternoon from Ghana.
Afternoon to you.
Please, I think the history of energy started from stone, wood, crude, hydro, and now we have renewable form of energy. It looks as if it is going with a particular generation. And then that generation are the only generation that know about the changes in energies that we have. How do we guide the next generation or generation yet to know what what hydro energy is, renewable energies are, and how crude? How do we guide them to be aware of these energy divisions? Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Joseph, Susan, would you like to respond to that?
Yes. How do we guide the youth to the utilization of renewable energies?
Yes,
is again purely about leadership. It's also purely about governance issues. As I said, there is the African Summit, which is coming soon. There have actually been a lot of preparations of the global summit after the African Summit, which happened just a few days ago. And I do know that the subject of renewable energy was quite a laudable and debatable matter in that forum. What we need as the leadership and opinion shapers of the world today is to emphasize on the need of use of this renewable energy. Remember, I did say that renewable energy sources in terms of greenhouse gas emissions is so significant that if indeed we are talking about reducing greenhouse gases in the environment and therefore mitigating climate change, we have no option. And we have very little time left, because if you look at the historical development of the mitigation of climate change, it started very many years ago. And so many forums have been held, so many resolutions have been made. I think I remember there was Copenhagen, there was Paris, Kyoto Protocol, all this. They talk about mitigation of climate change. And in the energy sector, or if you want to say in the energy space, the most effective mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions from the fuels that are very widely used in the generation of energy is the use of renewable energy as an alternative. And we must all be ready to play a part in influencing the youth and everybody else to utilization of these renewable energy sources. The world itself must agree to emphasize more on the use of renewable energy and also to support the development of renewable energy. And that is why I talked about Africa asking for a bigger pie of the kitty because of its endowed huge resources of renewable energy. Then it is also very important that we must also include not just the youth, we must also include the other vulnerable groups. We must include women, because women in themselves play a very effective leadership in the homes. And they are the best influencers when it comes even to influencing the youth and also the elders. We need to include all these people. We need to lobby. We need to rally them and make sure that the song is very loud about the use of renewable energy. Thank you.
Well said. Thank you so much, Joseph. Can I turn to Hubert, please? You are welcome.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. There's still a little time. I would like to react and comment and also encourage through my experience this platform of nexus between peace and renewable energy. First, the latest comment. Thank you, Njoroge, for again emphasizing on leadership to influence the youth understanding and practicing renewable and responsible energy use, but also renewable energy resources. I would like to add that it is not only a question of call for leadership, but it is also a question of pragmatic approach. So, for example, myself, as a peace builder, thank you for Susan also for the comment to nature. I'm aware that nature does not need me, but I need it. So I invested in a hydropower plant, a rural hydropower plant in Rwanda, as an investor, but also as an accompanier, linking renewable energy power plant in Rwanda to peace and reconciliation. In this power plant, for example, that is why I talk also by pragmatic ideas, creative ideas, we invite regularly the schools, especially secondary schools, to visit the power plant to understand how it works, how it runs, where the electricity is sold, how the water is actually not used, just flowing through the turbine. We did not apply to this new technology Njoroge was emphasizing in. But anyway, you understand. So if we have leadership combined with this day-to-day pragmatic creativity, then we can influence the youth. You may see that MTN, Vodafone, Telecom, whatever, they don't ask for strategies how to influence youth to use the telephone and the mobile phone and the Android. They just implement it, and the youth will experience in their growing life experience this new technology. If we achieve With all these very good ideas and also research and results of our speakers today, if we reach this reality through governance, through legal frame, through coping with upfront investment costs and all these aspects, if we achieve to implement and to open it to community, the hydropower plant, the windmills, the solar installations and so on schools, for example, then the new generation will just live with it. And they may never go back to fossil energy production and use. So it will be normal. That is my first aspect, to appeal to all of us to create this pragmatism and say, okay, we are here in, we can help as a teacher, as whatever, and a community leader to look for some renewable energy projects and activities around us and to bring the youth into it. And not only the youth, even local opinion leaders, political leaders, religious leaders, to make them understanding. My second aspect, if you allow, is a comment and encouragement, or even a little answer, if I may say so, to Dr. Susan's question of how to bring the religious and Catholic, particularly in this, in her case, Catholic peace movement, to open up for renewable energy. I congratulate this webinar platform to have this courage to look out of our, let's say, to look out of our general peace ideas and go to other aspects, technology, even close to politics, as we heard at the beginning about the African Energy Summit and so on, Climate Summit. So we open up, and if we accept as a peace movement, if we accept in our daily development aid for communities, for rural development, for education, for health, there are so many programs. If we accept to include this nexus of renewable energy, then we can actually open up and impact a lot on what I said before and what we are all agree in this webinar. And I give you the example as a peace consultant bureau and consultant program. We are accompanying presently, since 2-3 years, 4 hydropower plants in the rebel and milice region of East Congo in Butembo, Beni. So the church there, the Catholic Church, responding to the energy need of the villages, created with a Catholic donor in Germany, these renewable energy small hydropower plants. And we are accompanying so that the effects of this technology is influencing the local communities, so social cohesion, because of use of energy, of light, of a better health station, of an active, inviting school, because of light, because of projector and whatever. All this we try to bring into the peace learning in these communities. This is a concrete work I'm working in, of course, with our colleagues from Rwanda and Congo. And recently, since July, together with the Toyota Mobility Foundation, we are starting a project with data assessment and with project concept and project writing in Kenya, Mombasa, and Malindi dioceses, Catholic dioceses, to bring the hydrogen technology down to villages, down to the social activities of the church in the community. So if we agree that education, health, social and economic development in villages is linked necessarily to energy and then to renewable energy, then we can link the peace movement, the peace learning with new and sustainable energy use. Thank you very much. Just to complete from a practical aspect, this very good intervention of our platform and also of the speakers today, and just witnessing how much I am encouraged and also enthusiastic to be part of these regular Wednesday meetings. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Hubert, and for sharing your own experience. And probably the speakers would like to comment on that.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me agree. I think that was Richard. Let me agree that indeed there is need for not just leadership, but pragmatic leadership. I entirely agree. And I am very happy with the example that you have exemplified of what you have actually done, using small hydropower plants to facilitate peace. Because when people compete for resources, insecurity is triggered. And one way of mitigating that insecurity is actually providing that resource. And that is what our Reverend Father has done by providing that energy, which can be used for many things. Of course, lighting, which itself directly impacts on the security of the people. It can also be used for pumping of water. Sometimes some areas are mainly occupied by pastoralists, and one of the commodities that they fight for and therefore create insecurity is water. And with the power plant, it is possible to use that energy and distribute that water to the various communities, and therefore preempt that competition of water. One pertinent question is whether there is climate justice. When we look at what the debate that goes around the entire world with all these conferences, and where it is very clear that the West needs to do more in terms of mitigating pollution, because they're actually the main contributors to that. What I don't know is whether really they do as much as they should in terms of paying for polluting the environment, because that is where mainly the pollution comes from. However, it is important for all of us, whether in the West, whether in the East, whether in the South or North, the commitment to climate mitigation is critical. If we don't do it, we will be sacrificing and compromising our own lives, because environment itself is indeed life. Now, I have just led another question about the sufficiency of renewable energy. I would say yes, we have sufficient renewable energy. When I look at Africa, I did say Inga, the river Inga in DRC, it's if all the energy in it was exploited today, I'll give it another 5 years, that energy can be able to be distributed in the entire Africa. But the framework of now making every Africa country contribute to the development of that energy is where the question is. How possible is it? Is there goodwill for that? Then we all know, as I said, that solar is all over the entire African continent. African continent is crossed by the equator, and therefore the conductivity by the sun is very significant, and therefore literally every country has got potential for solar energy. Wind energy is huge, a lot of it, because of the physical features of the African continent. We have got a coastline, we've got mountains, we've got lowlands, and wind is literally generated by the variation of our physical features. So yes, there is sufficient. What we need is the resources to exploit that renewable energy. And I would also want to answer that question together with another one about the cost. It is true. Exploiting renewable energy is fairly, it requires a lot of resources. It's capital intensive. But the silver lining in this is that with my experience in the energy sector, I can tell you that 20 years ago, I think to exploit solar compared to today was about 20 times more. I think one kilowatt hour of solar was more than 100 US cents or $1. Today, as we speak, you only need about 3, 4, 5 US cents to produce 1 kilowatt hour of solar. So a lot of research has been done with regard to exploitation of renewable energy sources. And that is where we are even talking about new technologies like the kinetic power plant. We are talking about the new technologies about hydrogen, use of hydrogen, because of the advanced and the commitment of research by the scientists in terms of reducing the cost of renewable energy. So I must say there has been a lot of work done. The scientists have done a very good job in reducing even the cost and in coming up with the new innovations and technologies. I think what we need is commitment from the readers so that we can be able to channel more resources towards exploitation of the renewable energy resources. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's turn to Lester. Lester's been waiting for quite a while. Could you please ask your question or make a comment? Thanks.
Thank you so much for this wonderful discussion, so crucial and so informative and stimulating. The presentation was really helpful, and I enjoyed the discussion. I'd like to add to Thomas's philosophical and technical insights a little bit of sociology, and that's my occupational hazard. And I think maybe the most powerful concept in social thought is ownership of the means of production. And the Industrial Revolution was owned first by Britain and then by the Europeans, and they conquered the world with it, right? And then we had this wave of technological revolutions, and the richest people in the world are people like Bill Gates and the tech people, right? The people who are taking advantage of that technology. So it seems like there's a real opportunity for Africa here, and for peace in the next wave, and the creation of new energy technologies that are so crucial to economics. And Africa has all these incredible resources, as our presenters have been pointing out. The problem is they're not owned by Africans, right? I mean, and so the question is, in a way, how do we mobilize people to shift ownership from non-African transnational corporations and government, because people are rushing in, exploiting local conflicts. In this new scramble for Africa, and I'm wondering how we can try to avoid that.
Susan or Joseph, could you say something about that issue?
I think that is a very, very interesting question about how we can deal with the ownership of these resources. And I would want to toss it to Susan, who is a political scientist, to tell us how we can tame the flight of these African resources to the West.
Unfortunately, George, my biggest worry is how the coups are emerging in Africa out of the West's refusal to relinquish the resources that there are in Africa. The coup that was in Niger, the coup that was in Gabon, the coup that was in Chad, in Burkina Faso, in Mali, majority of those coups have actually in one way been blamed on communities fighting over resources. And one of the things that have come out very strongly, especially in Niger, is France's refusal to leave Niger and Gabon because they are buying uranium. The entry of so many Western countries into Congo, not because they want to help the African continent with their ideas, but because they want to have a bigger share of the resources to the detriment of the African people. And because of that, the African continent is not able to fund even the debates on climate change and the climate crisis. Then there will never be climate justice, because the agenda is going to be set by the very people who see.
I can see that Susan is breaking up a bit, but her point was made loud and clear. And as we are coming close to the end,
issue, and as a contributor, not only challenge in the African continent, that will require a lot of partnership, collaboration, and a lot of discussions between the West and the African countries.
Right. Thank you so much indeed, Susan. Thank you very much indeed, Joseph, and everybody for participating in today's discussion. I would like to ask Susan and Joseph for just one minute, say their final word for us to take home with.
Thank you, George. I'm delighted to have made some contribution to this subject of peace and security in the context of using renewable energy to facilitate production of instruments that can mitigate insecurity and therefore bring about peace. This subject of renewable energy is very topical today. And the whole world knows that if you continue developing countries with the conventional types of energy, we will continue to increase our output of greenhouse gas emissions, and finally, we will impact very adversely on the environment. Therefore, the use of renewable energy in reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and therefore mitigate climate change which impacts so adversely on insecurity and therefore brings the setback of lack of peace, requires the input of these sort of resources like renewable energy so that we can pacify most of the people in the world. We can create a cohesive and an environment and a world that has got equity and equitability. It is so important that we are all advocates of this subject of peace in the context of using renewable energy to mitigate climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Susan, please.
George, thank you so much. I want to appreciate the participants for listening to us and giving us the comments. And I want to say that the discourse on climate change is not going to end now. It is a debate that is going to be there for a long time because environmental challenges have no boundaries. They don't respect any boundaries. And once one country is affected, all the other countries are affected. So I want to attend many more of these meetings on climate crisis, especially globally. Thank you so much, George.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed, Susan. Thank you, Joseph, again. Thank you, everyone. Welcome back to Global Peace Studies for Sustainable Development in Africa next week. We'll be looking at actually the challenges of the lack of peace and how that affects social or the psychology of people in Africa. So thank you very much indeed. All the best.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.